Hello everybody, it's Timothy here with Mana Rocks, and in this video we'll be covering the top 10 EDH commanders that made other unplayable cards good, or at least gave a home to some otherwise terrible Magic cards. As always, before we jump in, I hope you enjoyed this video, and feel free to subscribe below for more content like this. Also, this was a really fun list to make with plenty of choices, so let me know if you have a commander in mind that didn't make this list. Let's go ahead and kick things off with a couple honorable mentions. First off, we have Morophon the Boundless from Modern Horizons. 7 colorless mana for a 6/6 changeling that lets you choose any creature type, pumps all of those creatures by +1/+1, and makes them cheaper to cast by 1 of each color. We're going to see a couple of other tribal commanders on our list, but Morophon is the go-to everyman's tribal commander. If you have a tribe in mind that you want to play and there just isn't a good legendary to helm the deck, Morophon is probably the way to go. Want to play Goat Tribal? Morophon's got you covered. Looking for a 5-color Golem deck? Morophon's got your back. It doesn't quite make the list because a bad tribe is still a bad tribe, and if anything, the spot is more a testament to how ubiquitous Morophon is as a commander than it is a recommendation to play a bad tribal deck. In a similar vein, I wanted to make sure to mention Depala, despite being another tribal commander, mostly because I think it's a cool design for a Boros commander that does something that Boros generally doesn't. That something, unfortunately, is vehicles and dwarves, and while the good vehicles are very good, think Sky Sovereign or Smuggler's Copter, the bad ones are exceptionally bad. No one ever talks about Demolition Stomper, and, well, there's a reason for that. Same goes for dwarves, which admittedly there are a decent number of, and some are surprisingly good, but for the most part, they fall shy of commander playable. Look, Depala decks just need a massive vehicles and dwarves to function, so if there's ever going to be a home for these cards, it's in this deck. And our final honorable mention goes to a mechanic-based commander, Halar the Fire Fletcher. We've got very good commanders now for Cyclone decks, Flashback decks, Morph decks, so on and so forth, but if kicker and multi-kicker are your thing, Halar might be worth looking into. There are actually a couple kicker matters payoff cards, and Halar is one of the only commanders to take advantage of those. There are plenty of outrageously good kicker spells, of course, but with Halar at the helm, you're pretty happy to play some of the bad ones too. Alright, on to the actual list. First up is everybody's favorite butt-fighting Elder Dragon, Arcades the Strategist. From what I can tell, Arcades has been quite popular since its printing in Core 2019, and it gave life to the Defenders Matters archetype for EDH. Before Arcades, we had Phoenix, which focused more on Millen players, and of course Doran the Siege Tower, which was our go-to high-toughness Matters commander for quite some time. See, with Doran, you didn't get to just free-roll the ability to attack with defenders. You would need to use some other ancillary card like Assault Formation to actually turn defenders into attackers, and so Doran plays out more like a high-toughness beatdown deck than an actual defender deck. Arcades is a different story. Arcades takes embarrassing, run-of-the-mill creatures with defender, turns them into efficient beaters, and draws you cards all the while. If you've played against an Arcades deck, you've likely been attacked by an 8/8 flying untargetable Wall of Denial, and you probably know how scary even the most mediocre defenders can be while the commander's on board. I mentioned during the honorable mentions that Depala was worth bringing up by virtue of being a Boros commander with a unique game plan, and our number 2 slot fits that bill as well, given Boros a play pattern other than tap out and attack. That commander is War of the Sparks Feather the Redeemed, a 3/4 flyer for red, white, white that returns instants and sorceries to your hand if you cast them targeting one of your own creatures. It has a similar function to Zada Hedron Grinder, which essentially copies all of your targeted spells onto all of your other creatures. Like Zada, Feather makes good use of cheap targeted cantrips and pump spells, allowing you to turn a single targeted spell into actual card advantage. Unlike Zada, though, Feather has a bunch of cards on the map that no one would have previously considered playing in EDH beforehand. Most of these are white cantrips and protection spells that previously had no business being in someone's decks. Cards like Defiant Strike and Bandage, which do the bare possible minimum a Magic card can do. It's actually amazing how good these cards are alongside Feather, considering how generally weak they are. Feather also has access to a number of other unique cards that don't really see play outside the deck. One of my personal favorites is Orum's Thunder, which costs 2 and a white to destroy an artifact or enchantment. However, if you kick it with a single red mana, you can deal damage equal to the destroyed permanent's mana cost to target creature. If you kick the spell while destroying a cheap artifact or enchantment and have Feather take 2 or 3 damage, you get the Orum's Thunder back, and you can continue to disenchant your opponent's mana rocks. Intimidation Bolt's another fun Feather card, which for a colorless, a red and a white, deals 3 damage to target creature and stops other creatures from attacking for the turn. Feather has a convenient 4 toughness, so as long as Feather survives, you can keep targeting Feather with Intimidation Bolt to lock players out of attacking. Our next entry on this list is definitely a gimmicky commander. You know how every new release has a card floating around that's so bad it makes you wonder, why would I ever play this? Well, the answer is because your commander is Zedruu the Greathearted. At face value, Zedruu looks like a typical everybody's happy, fun-time group hug commander. It's a Jeskai commander, and for Jeskai colors, you can give an opponent of your choice any one of your permanents. Why would you want to do that? Well, either you're just a completely benevolent human being, or it's because during your upkeep you gain life and draw cards equal to the number of cards that your opponents control that you own. So the dynamic is pretty simple. Give your opponent some cards, profit off your generosity. But if you've seen a Zedruu deck in action, you know it's all a big farce. Yeah, those unplayable cards from every set with egregious drawbacks I was talking about a moment ago, those are Zedruu's best friends. Let this be a warning. Zedruu is not your friend. At some point, you're going to end up with a Rust Elemental, a 4-mana, 4/4 artifact creature that deals 4 damage to its controller every turn unless they sacrifice an artifact. Illusions of Grandeur is a popular choice for these decks, which grants the controller 20 life when it enters the battlefield, but loses the controller 20 life when it leaves the battlefield. Zedruu players reap the benefit, donate it to someone else, let them suffer the cumulative upkeep costs, and then dome them for 20 when it inevitably leaves the battlefield. There are other really cruel things Zedruu can do, like donate a Pyromancer's Swath, which forces its controller to discard their hand on every end step, or an aggressive Mine-In, which simply says the controller cannot play lands. Basically, Zedruu takes unplayable, ridiculous cards and turns them into legitimate win conditions. So again, if you sit down against a Zedruu deck, you've been warned. Next up, we've got a bit of a 2-for-1 with a set of Battle Bond partners. Do you enjoy random variants, drawing your entire deck, or one-shotting opponents in combat? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you would thoroughly enjoy the tag team of Aquan and Zndrsplt, the coin-flipping commanders of choice. If you don't know, both commanders let you flip a coin on combat until you lose a flip. Aquan doubles its power and toughness when you win a flip, and Zndrsplt draws you a card. The thing is, these abilities trigger anytime you win a flip, not just the coin flips from their own abilities. So what this means is that the deck is typically filled with coin flip cards, something you don't see too often in Commander, and the deck looks to flip so many coins that either you outcard people with Zndrsplt, or you send Aquan into the red zone for lethal Commander damage. Here's the thing. Coin flip cards are generally pretty bad because you're leaving things up to random chance, but your commanders turn even the worst coin flip cards into real card advantage. Obviously, Krark's Thumb is the best card in the deck, allowing you to essentially reflip any single coin flip, and the deck even gets its own alternate win condition in Chance Encounter. This Odyssey enchantment costs 2 red, gets a luck counter anytime you win a coin flip, and straight up wins you the game on your upkeep if it has 10 luck counters. And while most coin flip cards would never see the light of day in other decks, there are a couple like Frenetic Ifrit and Frenetic Sliver, which are insanely good in this deck. Both creatures have a 0 mana activated ability that lets you flip a coin. The rest of the ability doesn't matter since these allow you to essentially put a ton of coin flips on the stack, triggering your commanders over and over again. It's a fun deck for sure that benefits from other coin flip cards in existence, and without the One-Eyed Duo, you'd probably never see most of these cards cast in Commander. Our number 5 commander that turned unplayable cards into something worth talking about is one of the legendary creatures to come out of the original Conspiracy set. Grenzo Dungeon Warden costs red, black, X for a 2/2 that enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. The strange part is that for 2 mana, you get to mill the bottom card of your library, and if it's a creature with power less than or equal to Grenzo's power, you put that creature onto the battlefield. There are plenty of commanders that care about setting up your draws or manipulating the top of the deck, but Grenzo is the only commander I can think of that cares about manipulating the bottom of the library. Now, there are plenty of ways to build a Grenzo deck where you cheat creatures into play, and from my experience, they can often be quite powerful, but for the purposes of this video, we're going to take a quick look at some of the enablers that Grenzo decks can play that don't really see play anywhere else. Telegelad Stylus can tap to put a permanent you control on the bottom of your library, whereas cards like Riedo Lantern and Epitaph Golem can return cards from the graveyard to the bottom of the library. How about Commander Staple Soldevi Digger, a 2-mana artifact with a 2-mana activated ability that takes the top card of your library and puts it on the bottom? Sure, these are cards that are completely unplayable in your typical deck, but it's worth mentioning that Grenzo does benefit from other decent cards that can set up the bottom card. Cards like Darksteel Pendant and Scry effects in general might take the place of your typical Sensei's Divine and Top type card here, where they might otherwise be a bit underpowered in a typical deck. I'm cheating a little bit on this next one since it's technically a group of commanders rather than just one card, but my list, my rules. Those cards would be some of our most recent additions to Commander, the Ikoria Apex creatures, specifically Luna, Snapdax, Vadric, and Nethroi. See, here's the thing with this cycle. Each of these 4 Apexes has a very powerful trigger whenever they mutate. In most cases, if they're your commander, you'll mutate them onto a creature you already control, get the trigger, and that's it. In order to take full advantage of the card, however, you'll need to have other mutate creatures in your deck in order to trigger their abilities again. While there are some really good mutate creatures from Ikoria and Commander 2020, we're limited to what we got with the most recent releases, and so you might have to resort to playing some of the less exciting mutate creatures in order to maximize your commander's potential, hence their inclusion on this top 10. Not that you have to build any of these commanders with tons of mutate creatures in your deck, but due to the nature of mutate and the limited quantity of mutate creatures in existence, these commanders mean that some of the weaker mutate creatures will see play where the otherwise might not if the pool of mutate creatures to choose from were slightly larger. Cards like Cloudpiercer and Vulpikeet are among the weaker mutate creatures that don't necessarily stand on their own well, but because of the Apex creatures, you'll likely see people playing these creatures until we see other mutate creatures printed. Note that I intentionally left Brokos off of this list since it plays a little differently than the rest of them, so I suppose you could include it here alongside Otrimi the Everplayful, but I chose to go with the commanders that needed to be mutated multiple times to reach their fullest potential. Alright, at the start of this video I said there would be a couple more tribal commanders on this list, so here's the first, representing a tribe with only 7 creatures, one of which is an unglued card, and one of which doesn't match the colors of the commander. Now, technically, calling Atla Palani a tribal commander is a bit of a misnomer, since she's a self-contained engine that doesn't technically require you to take up deck slots with egg creatures in order for her to function. See? Her main ability is that whenever an egg you control dies, you dig through your library and put the next creature you hit onto the battlefield. Get it? They hatched. My little bird egg hatched into an Ulamog. Who knew? Anyway, Atla can tap for 2 mana to make a 0/1 egg defender, so she creates her own fodder, and therefore you don't even need other eggs in your deck. The thing is, not only can you play other eggs in your deck, if you wanted to, but they're actually really good in the deck. Imagine playing Dragon Egg or Rock Egg in your typical commander deck. That's just ridiculous. But when your 3-drop dies into a 2/2 Fire-Breathing Dragon and a Vorinclex at the same time, you start to wonder just how unplayable a Dragon Egg really is. I love Atla Palani because it breathes life into a bunch of useless cards and does so in a powerful way. The reason tribal commanders like Gargos and Yuriko don't make this list is because their respective tribes tend to be good in a vacuum. Hydras and Ninjas benefit from having a powerful commander at the helm, but Hydras and Ninjas also tend to be reasonable cards on their own. Eggs do not. Because of Atla, the few eggs we do have and future eggs that might be printed have a home in Commander. Same goes for the last tribal commander we'll see here in just a couple minutes. Listen, I'm cheating again for our number 8 spot because these two commanders have similar design philosophies. See, there's a term people like to use in Magic jargon, keyword soup, which refers to any creature that just has a bunch of evergreen keyword abilities on it. Two fairly new commanders that fit this bill perfectly are C19's Rayami, First of the Fallen, and C20's Cathril Aspect Warper. Rayami causes creatures that die to be exiled and gains keyword abilities based on the creatures that were exiled with its effect. Cathril is a little more complex, allowing you to distribute ability counters to your creatures based on the abilities of creatures in your graveyard, and gets +1/+1 counters based on the number of abilities. While there is a little difference in which commander can gain which abilities, for example, Rayami can gain haste and protection, whereas Cathril cannot, the overlap means that regardless of which one you're playing, you'll be looking for keyword soup creatures that grant your commander multiple abilities off of one card. There are some pretty no-brainer inclusions, things like Zatalpa and Questing Beast, which have more abilities than necessary, but the real fun comes in finding some of the obscure cards that have no real business being in a commander game. Think cards like Ramanop Hydra, which has Vigilance, Reach, and Trample, and a bunch of nonsense text about deserts, or Sky Hunter Skirmisher, a 3-mana 1/1 with flying and double strike, and that's it. They're not flashy creatures, but they don't have to be. Their whole purpose is to die and pump up your commander. Rayami, in particular, gets a little strange. See, because of Rayami's ability to gain protection, it can gain individual subsets of protection from creatures with protection abilities. For example, if something with protection from black dies, Rayami gains pro-black, obviously. But if something like Harbinger of Spring dies, Rayami gains protection from non-spirit creatures, which is both bizarre and surprisingly good. I think my favorite creature that has potential in these decks is Gurmag Swiftwing, a 2-mana 1/2 bat with flying, first strike, and haste. Imagine a card like Gurmag Swiftwing, not even playable in its draft format, being sleeved up in someone's commander deck. Again, I don't fully recommend some of these creatures, but it's interesting to think some of these underpowered cards have a place in commander because of cards like Rayami and Cathril. And yes, I know about Odric Lunarch Marshal, I just don't care for the card. Here we are at number 9 with the last of our tribal commanders, and similar to Atla Palani, there's a significant delta between the power level of the commander and the actual creatures in its tribe. That tribe is Scarecrows, led by Reaper King, a 5-color, 6/6 artifact creature that gives all your other Scarecrows +1/+1 and turns every Scarecrow that hits your board into a Vindicate. Seriously, every single Scarecrow you play takes out a permanent on its way in, any permanent including lands. Sounds powerful, sure, but here's the problem. Scarecrows suck. Really bad. They're not egg bad, but they usually have strange color-based abilities or underpowered stat lines for their mana costs due to being artifact creatures. That's not to say they're all terrible. Scarecrown might be the best of the bunch, which can sacrifice Scarecrows to draw cards or reanimate artifact creatures. Painter's Servant and Pilipala see play in EDH, but that's by virtue of being combo pieces, not because they're actually good cards. But aside from those, if you're seeing other Scarecrows on the battlefield, it's likely you're playing with or against a Reaper King deck. Scuttlemutt can tap for mana, I guess. One-Eyed Scarecrow gives a minor debuff to your opponent's flyers. Look, I'm really stretching here. And Wildfield Scarecrow does a decent Scarecrow impression of Burnished Heart. There are certainly others, but they're not really worth bringing up. Because of Reaper King, even the worst creatures with subtype Scarecrow have some viability, but Reaper King has to pull an enormous amount of the weight in those decks. This is one of those tribes where you're probably better off cheesing it with Changelings. Closing out our list, we have another mechanic-based commander in the same vein as Halar from our honorable mentions, but instead of Kicker, we're talking about Madness. Clearly, we're talking about Anya Falconwrath, a borderline broken commander that functions as a hasty looter or rummager, if you will. Discard a card, draw a card. Pretty simple. The catch is that when you discard a card with Madness, you untap Anya and get to activate her again. Theoretically, if you keep discarding Madness cards, you can turbo through your deck by activating over and over again, and because of this, Anya decks usually win through mass discard payoffs or reanimation effects. Now, there are certainly some good Madness cards, but there aren't tons of them. In order to capitalize on Anya's potential, players often include whatever Madness cards they can get their hands on to keep the chain going, even when those Madness cards themselves are less than desirable. We're talking virtually vanilla creatures like Blood Mad Vampire and Reckless Worm, or hell, even Weirded Vampire, which might be the worst madness creature out there. Doesn't matter, still sees play. And the same goes for madness removal. Cards like Alchemist's Greeting, Murderous Compulsion, and Dark Withering are not good EDH cards in a vacuum, but Anya makes them good. As long as Anya's doing her thing, all of your madness cards replace themselves, and that makes even the smallest madness effect something desirable for the deck. You see this a lot with mechanic-based commanders, where a subset of weaker cards becomes EDH playable due to the existence of some new commander that makes them desirable. This is certainly the case with Anya and Madness cards, which actually flips the script and turns those undesirable cards into real engine pieces. Alright, that's all I've got for today. What did you think of the list? Is there a commander that made unplayable cards good in EDH that I didn't mention? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have suggestions for top 10 videos like this, let me know. Remember to subscribe below. Find us on Twitter at MTG_ManaRocks. Thanks for watching. My name's Timothy with ManaRocks, and I'll see you all next time.